I'm back with another episode of Semi-Pro. This time I'm bringing with me Scrawny, a longtime CSGO commentator, currently the duo partner of Launders, and he joins me today to talk about his time commentating in the year of our Lord 2020, both the good times and the bad. And I wanted to start off with a bit of a question on the challenging aspect of 2020. One of the most challenging aspects when you're a broadcast talent is making sure you bring the hype and making sure that it feels appropriate given the circumstances. So I wanted to talk about like adapting to the online nature of the Counter-Strike events. Even though when you were working with Blast, you were obviously in a studio, which probably helped, I imagine. But I wanted to ask, since the pros aren't in the studio with you, there's no crowd in the studio with you, a lot of the fans in general, there was like this prevailing notion in the community that the stakes felt like they were lowered or they just weren't, something intangible was missing from the experience of watching an event. So how did you overcome these hurdles as a commentator?
Good question. Big challenge, right? I feel like that was the challenge of 2020, and I think it kind of came at us in stages. If we throw it back to like the spring season for Blast and working entirely remotely from home, I think there was a lot of adaptation needed back then, and I think it was easier to kind of get away with adapting on the fly because everybody was just scrambling to still put on a show.
Yes.
The TOs were scrambling. We were scrambling. It's like it was such a shock to everybody that this was kind of happening to us that no matter what we were able to provide, it just kind of like it worked. You know, at least we still had Counter-Strike. I think we all needed Counter-Strike at that point. So the first challenge was like, yeah, we're no longer in front of crowds, huge crowds. We're no longer on stages. We're no longer in a studio. We're no longer even standing next to each other in terms of casting. And that was incredibly hard. Really, really tough. I think at first it was like there's an element of like maybe faking it because you're just trying to feel it out again, right? I feel like there was a process that a lot of casters go through, or just anybody on a broadcast, where it's like you start on the online low tier events, and then eventually you get to crack into the LAN scene, and then as the crowds get bigger and the broadcasts get more professional, you know, you're adding tools and you're creating a rhythm. You know, you've got your routine of how to cast certain situations and whatnot. But that entire setup gets upended when all of a sudden you're sitting in the same room that you play video games in. So I did feel like we had to kind of relearn how to cast for a little bit, or at least I did particularly. And you know, now we fast forward to a point where we're at least back in a studio. That is huge, man. That right there, being in a studio with a production team, a full production team, especially at the level of Blasts, is immense. It helps incredibly to do our job better. I don't think that we did as good of a job remotely as we are doing right now for multiple reasons. And I'd say being next to launders and being next to your partner, being next to the person you're talking with is the most important thing. Point final. Like there's nothing like talking to the person who's standing right next to you. You see the body language, you see the energy. You know, it's just you're more connected, and that's so crucial to commentary because when we were working entirely remote, dude, it's like, especially with like just the technical limitations of like speaking over one another, you know, our voice transmitting to each other, we'd constantly step on the end of each other's sentences. And once we learned that was going to be a problem, you're now trying to adapt your cast to have pauses at the ends of your sentences that aren't natural. See, there's just all these layers of stuff that made it feel so different. So where we are right now, back together, back in a studio, full quality production, top quality production as well with the events we've had the luck of working, and you know, we just miss the crowds. We miss the crowds. We miss the players, and I think those are the last two pieces that will get us back to where we once were. Obviously, whether those crowds are going to be 100 people like what we had at Blast London to start 2020, or back to obviously, you know, roaring crowds, which seems a little further away. I don't know what's around the corner, but those are the things that we're still missing, and they affect the cast. But I do feel like the product that everybody in CSGO has been able to put back together now at this point, at the end of 2020, we're on track.
One of the first things you brought up was the fact that everybody was scrambling to get, their shit together essentially at the beginning of 2020, at the onset of the pandemic that locked everything down and made it so that we all had to go back to the bedroom style for a little while. One of the
Yeah.
things that really gets to me is obviously not only did we have the circumstances by which we're all dealing with these challenging conditions together, we also have an insane amount of actual tournaments, just raw scheduled tournaments that were
Yeah,
happening.
sure.
It was almost nonstop. And you can't always have the time to be introspective and to think back on all the things that could have been done better and how can I adapt to these new conditions if you're just moving on to the next tournament right after, minutes after you pack up on the previous one. So obviously this did happen to you guys. Not only did you and Launders have to deal with just a large number of tournaments close together, but when Anders and Semler were unable to meet the requirements due to some internet issues or some sort of latency thing where they were almost a second behind on their cast, it seemed like Blast had made an executive decision to just say, all right, well, we got to rely on people who are in the studio with us. That happened to be you and Launders. So my question to you now is, like, how do you even take the moment to really look back and reflect on what can be done better? It seems like you would have to really be living and breathing this stuff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in order to even have a chance at like adapting and getting better at this new, in these new environments, given that you are working all the time. I think you guys went back to 3 best of 3s in a day at some point. So that must have been challenging. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the way we kind of break it down is you do it in stints. There was a period, like if we're speaking most recently, where Anders and Semler unfortunately were locked up in London, and weren't really able to be a part of the Blast events. Great shame, by the way. The I would say the biggest shame of the end of the year is that we did not have Anders and Semler's voices on any of the casts, basically, for Blast. And that damn, that's a shortcoming. But I think you have to see it as a stint. We went into Europe 2.5 months ago, knowing that we were going from the Blast series into a couple weeks off with some Valorant events sprinkled in, straight to the Showdown, DreamHack Masters, Blast Finals. Those 3 last events were 21 days of straight broadcasts, 2 best of 3s a day, the entire time. With DreamHack specifically, we were also the analysts and the casters and the hosts, so it was a lot of work, and I don't think there is time during those kinds of grinds to really stop and reflect. We had 1 day off when we came back from DreamHack Masters to Blast Finals, and I am so appreciative that Blast made sure we had that 1 day off. It could have been a media day. We could have had obligations. I could have been called in to record some CS money related things. But instead they just said like, stop and come back tomorrow. And so I don't think you stop to break it down in those moments. I think what you do is now that we're home, and we have this time over the holidays to kind of decompress, that's where I'm now going back and rewatching some of the games that I remembered fondly. When it comes to like micro adjustments in the cast, I think by the end of the day whether you had a good cast or an off day, if you were too tired, or if you were, if you missed the mark, if you didn't do it justice, or if you overdid it, like those things, man, at this point I feel like we can gauge day by day. The overall scheme as to like where we want to take our casts, if we want to implement new things, that's got to be, again, like in phases. So we go back to, again, the beginning of the lockdown 2020. That's when the broadcast days were insane as well. That's when the tournament, like the turnover between tournaments, I think then was actually more difficult to stomach because there was no change of scenery. A huge part of casting, bro, is a chance to be able to travel, be in different studios, be in different, production teams, and have different people around you. Just that can be enough to kind of like shake off the fact that you are working day after day after day, kind of inadvertently saying the same things, depending on how the games go and whatnot and what teams you're casting. So back when we had online events remotely casting, you wouldn't even, it'd be the same room. We'd finish a Blast event, we'd go into DreamHack, and the only thing I would have changed was the audio equipment I was using and, the backdrop behind me. So that was more difficult, I would say, at the beginning of the year, because it really felt like a blur. But again, it was a blur that I think was necessary at the time, and that everybody was happy to be a part of, because we just felt like we were still bringing the show to the fans when the fans needed it. when we also kind of just needed it. It was nice to sink our nose into a bunch of work. But no, you reflect in waves at this point, I would say. And right now is kind of one of those, right? We're decompressing from the grand finale of 2020.
One of the things you just touched on towards the end there was the very next question that I actually had for you, which is when we look at the most recent tournaments that you guys casted, obviously that was Blast and DreamHack. The events that you did cast were under those banners. One of the things that the community seems to have praised Blast for was changing the pace, having a fresh take on things. Obviously, the user interface that they have there, the HUD, and the content pieces, and all of those things that sort of congealed into a much more, I guess, a desirable product for the average user, considering they were looking at a lot of MTG events for a while, and a lot of those did feel very, very similar. The IEM and ESL ones blurred together. The region disparities also didn't help, so there were some things that were out of their control for sure. Given that you also, like you mentioned, casted a DreamHack event as well, and you were essentially like the equivalent of judge, jury, and executioner for the broadcast, where you're filling in you're wearing so many hats, filling so many shoes. I wanted to get your take on that blur that you described it as, where maybe, okay, we can't necessarily improve from day to day. We've got to reflect on it in waves, like you say, but it must be rough to even get yourself hyped up and ready to go for another cast when it's just, another insert tournament by tournament organizer here, when it doesn't feel like it has that same amount of character. Do you think that the community in general is correct to write off a lot of the MTG events as feeling too similar? Did you feel that on the broadcast, or did you, obviously on the flip side, did you feel a positive change when you went to these Blast events? Did they really feel like something different? I wanted to get your take on like how similar or different some of these events actually were at the end of the day from the perspective of somebody who was on the broadcast.
Sure. So I definitely feel like Blast does it different. I feel like they've always aspired to do that, right? They have a very dedicated content team that makes those little 3-minute pieces possible. They've got really good video editors behind it as well that I think that make that all really come together nicely. It kind of comes at you quick, right? It's the 3-minute downtime in between halves. It's the 3-minute breaks between the casting desk and the analysts. It's just enough to, I think, keep your eyes on the show. I feel like you can sit down and watch an entire Blast broadcast from start to finish, and it's hard to get away from it, right? Because there's not unless you want to skip an analyst segment, which with the desk we had did an incredible job, and I personally wouldn't want to. Those are really the only kind of prolonged breaks. If not, you might miss that little 3-minute segment that Rops is surfing like a god. You might miss the 3-minute segment where Shocks is going off on one of his crazy tangents, and you don't want to, because Blast is entertaining, I think, from start to finish. And they put a lot of effort into making sure that happens with their extra pieces. The pieces that you don't necessarily need if you're just there for Counter-Strike. But I think that the pieces that take what is otherwise just a broadcast and turns it into entertainment and a show. Like Blast feels to me like a show. You could sit there in the studio and you could watch all those segment pieces on a projector, and I think you'd be entertained the whole time. Whereas with let's call it the ESL, and by extension of that now, because my takeaway with DreamHack Masters was that's what it felt like to me. That's how I imagine it feels like to be a part of ESL broadcast this year. DreamHack is the only time we touched on it. DreamHack's the only time we did that formula. And man, it was exhausting. You have a 3-minute break in that case with no content in between, right? So that's for the viewer. The content's for the viewer. As the caster and the analyst who's behind it, you cast a 40-minute game. Or let's just break down the broadcast day, okay? Because I think one of the unfortunate realities of 2020 is that you get this dilution of roles from the 3-man caster setup, the 3-man desk, and I'm not trying to take anything away from the people the Sponge, Machine, Henry, Pansy, Harry, Hugo, Stunna, Frankie was in the mix, right? Those are the names that were predominantly a part of those broadcasts. And they did an incredible job, because that setup puts so much pressure on the broadcast talent themselves to deliver the show. They are everything in the show. Because again, they don't have these little extra segments to kind of break the mood or to entertain people. So when people want their entertainment, if it's not coming from the Counter-Strike game itself, it has to come from these individuals. And you're barely given a chance to feed yourself in a setup like this. You go from a 30-minute pre-show into a 10-minute pre-game into a 40-minute cast. You've got maybe a 3-minute break between the pre-game and the cast. After 40 minutes of casting, the first map is over. You get 3 minutes before you're yourself supposed to unpack the first map over 5 minutes into a 3-minute break into a 40-minute cast. So that's 6 minutes of break over the course of 2 hours where you're supposed to do what? Like, what if you got to use the bathroom? What if you've got to get food? What if you just need a drink? Like, I don't know what their setup is in the studio. I don't know what they have in terms of, talent managers. I will say that during DreamHack Masters, Declan Murphy took incredible care of us, and he was there any single time that we needed something, and he was one of the main reasons that I think it was bearable to do. And ultimately, you've got to love the game, man. That's what makes getting up and casting Counter-Strike every day feel so worth it. And that's how you inherently get excited. I'm excited every time I get to cast because I get to cast. And that's what I love doing. When I was at home at the beginning of the year and we were all locked down, I told myself that once we got back into a studio, once we got even one step closer towards what was normal, you got to appreciate every single second of it. Being in airports again, appreciate every single second of it. I love this lifestyle. I love this job. So that's what gets me excited. But that's not what's going to get a viewer excited. They don't get to experience it from the inside. So in terms of making things less mundane and less repetitive, I do think that what Blast did, what Flashpoint does, those are very crucial. And I'm really hoping that in 2021 we see more of that, because it makes it different. It separates itself from what is just this repetitive grind. Because that's what it feels like, or that's what it felt like with DreamHack Masters. It felt like we were grinding ourselves. And, I remember at the end of all the events, me and Mohan just finished Blast Finals. We're sat there like leaning back in the chairs. And I look over at him and he goes, "Man, we did it. But I'm at the end of my rope." And if that was the analogy, us kind of sliding down to the bottom of the rope, hoping we get to the end of the show, before the end of the stint, before we fall off, I would say that the DreamHack Masters, man, dude, we were in free fall for a little bit, because it was just, if we had longer best of threes, we had 2-0s almost the entire time. If we had 2-1s, if we had more overtimes, if we had closer games, it would have been even more exhausting. I think we ate fast food 8 days in a row there in Sweden, because we weren't in a hotel that had a kitchenette set up in it. We weren't there with the best of catering at all times. The time zone, and everybody's stretched thin, man. Like, that's the thing with productions right now. It's like production teams are stretched thin because of the nature of the situation. And I can't speak for like what the ESL guys have to go through, but if it's anything compared to what we went through at DreamHack Masters, despite Counter-Strike being able to carry my life through on a day-to-day basis, I just hope they're really well taken care of, because I now understand just how demanding that setup is. And honestly, again, once more, like, props to the people on those ESL shows, because the job that they're doing and the consistency of their casting is incredible when you take into consideration how many games they've had to cast over the last 6 months.
Well, the TriCast itself was a bit of a hot topic on a recent episode of the By the Numbers, because of the fact that, many broadcast talent would almost call that a regression back to, years ago in
Yep.
esports space and Counter-Strike casting specifically, where you suddenly have these grueling days, the 14-hour days or 12-hour days or however long they end up being. And as you're alluding to, it must be incredibly demanding to do that on a regular basis, even just for one event. If it's enough to send you guys into free fall, who knows what you have to do, how long your rope has to be to do that for, most of the year, so to speak. So I was curious if you had, I know this was something that you were interested in expanding upon. So I'm just curious if you had any other sort of thoughts on going into 2021. Are there ways for these sort of TriCasts to be, the issues with them to be attenuated? Are there ways for us to, without necessarily relying on a potential lifting of all lockdowns and going back to what it was towards the end of 2019 or early 2020.
Sure.
What do you think that these tournament organizers might be able to do, or these talent managers might be able to do to make this job a little bit less about free falling?
So I think that I'm trying to like understand again. I'm trying to contextualize like the 3-person cast. They were a product of the initial lockdown. It happened when I believe it was Henry, Machine, Sponge, Harry, Hugo, Stunna. They were all locked in. I want to say in Berlin or Cologne, somewhere in Germany. They had that Lanchen set up. They were all living together, and they were going to the studio in sets of 3s. And so this setup that ESL used at the time, dude, it was awesome. It was the only studio show we had at the time. And as I've already touched on, studio broadcasts are inherently way better than having to work remotely on your own in wherever you may be. So at the time, I think that what they were able to produce was very important. And they did an incredible job during those initial lockdown phases. The guys were bringing props onto the show. They were having fun with it. Obviously people were putting so much energy and like character into it that it just seemed more like a celebration of the fact that we had Counter-Strike and we had the personalities and the talent in terms of broadcast to have a great show. I think that the Stunna, Harry, Hugo trio is something I could listen to all day. I'm good friends with those guys. And I think Stunna brings out their character in a great way. I love that formula, and the same for the other trio. But then as time went on, we got back to, again, this was at the beginning of 2020's lockdown. We get to the end of the year, and now we have, like, let's say Flashpoint's situation where they have 8, 9 members of broadcast that are all able to interchange between different roles. They want them to try different things. They encourage the fact that if somebody wants to cast one day with a different partner, that you just go and do it. And I respect that a lot because, again, like, we're pushing something in a better direction. Blast re-enters the show. Blast, they went remote back in spring, and they set us up very well with equipment. I think they elevated everybody's remote broadcast quality so that it could be the best show possible entirely remote, since they didn't have a studio like ESL. Blast now back in a studio with what would have been a 7-member talent team, 4 casters to cover. Remember that, 4 casters to cover 2 best of 3s a day. Ideally, Blast's formula is to have casters cover a single best of 3 a day. Dude, that is a dream. You wake up every day knowing exactly what 2 teams, what 10 players you have to study, prepare for, and then commentate on later in the day. You know that you only have to, gauge your energy for that 3 to 4 hour sprint, and therefore you can give it everything. You don't have to think about like, well, if I have a coffee now, I'm going to be down buzzing in between these mats. You don't have to think about that. And again, that's because Blast want us to succeed. Flashpoint want their talent to succeed. And as much as ESL, I'm sure they want the best quality product ever or possible. I just don't see a way that you can do that with putting so much work on 3 individuals at a time. And ESL's formula right now for their global finals, right? The global challenge, I think. It's the same situation. It's the same 3 people, which definitely earned their place to be there. But I think that they earned more at this point, right? They need more supportive staff. And then unfortunately, obviously, like, this is all, of course, speaking as if COVID isn't a thing. But we are looking at 2 productions out of the 3 at the end of the year that were affected by COVID. The end of Flashpoint, had a very sour taste, unfortunately. And also half of the desk at ESL gets shut down. So yes, anytime you're going to add in more ingredients to these broadcasts, you're going to be inherently increasing the chances of COVID being a problem, I suppose, unless you do a total bubble or total isolation or keep your people on site entirely. But I just don't see like a forward movement, and that's what kind of rubs me the wrong way, because it's like you've got these guys who have now busted their ass carrying your broadcasts, because it's not as though you're putting in effort to create content, etc. To be fair, Global Challenge did have some like surf things in between the maps, which I think was a great break. That's what you need, right? That's a step in the right direction. But now how can you ask the same guys who are covering your entire live commentary to then bring insight to a 5-minute analyst segment after the cast when you don't even have time to digest? Like, may I say, Harry and Hugo, I think have done a very good job on the analyst desk, all things considered. Compared to like me, for example, I don't feel like I bring anything to a desk. Mohan carried us in those segments at DreamHack Masters. I'm very aware of it because I'm the kind of person where like I need to sit back and digest what I've just observed. I need to collect my thoughts. And if I'm supposed to collect those thoughts in the 3 minutes before the 5-minute segment, dude, I got to go to use the bathroom. I got to get a coffee. Like I've got to do something. I'm not able to do that. Maybe it's a limitation of mine, or maybe I'm not trying hard enough. I don't know. But those guys make it seem so easy, all while I know how fucking hard it is. Like, and I don't know if they're getting enough respect or enough praise, or no, I would say respect, and not respect from viewers, because I think people understand how much they're grinding. I'd say they're not getting enough respect from their employers to be set up in a way where they can give you an even better show. If Harry and Hugo could focus on a 3-map cast without having to do any of the in-betweens, they would be even better than they are right now. And they're great commentators, and they're doing great on the broadcast. Same could be said for Machine and Sponge and whoever their third may be. They had like that rotating door because Henry walked away, because Pansy went back to PUBG. Yanko came in as this like last end of the year surprise. Sponge has been all over Counter-Strike in 2020. Personality of the year, right, is what they called him on the By the Numbers. And I don't think anybody can really disagree with that. He worked so hard for ESL. He helped carry ESL. And I know that he's also probably sat there behind the scenes trying to push for improvements and adaptations. And like, there's no way any of these guys, I think, can be truly satisfied with what's being asked of them. But I don't think that they see a way away from just doing it while they have to and hoping it gets better, right? And if nobody says anything right now at the end of 2020, I guarantee you 2021 will be more of the same, because I just don't see ESL taking the initiative themselves to push the product into 2 analysts, host, 2 casters, and maybe they have to do a completely remote broadcast in terms of a desk. Maybe you could do a host in the studio with the little 3-dimensional, like, what was it? It was like AR analyst desk. Yanko came in the floating bubble, right? Like maybe you've got to bring that in, but like, I just want to see these commentators given the respect they deserve and the chance that they deserve to do even better. And the current setup, I don't think creates an environment where that's possible.
Yeah, something you spoke to regarding ESL specifically is that sense that there's a lack of forward momentum towards improving, whereas some of the things that you talked about when you were contrasting the early online remote events that Blast put out with the later ones that were with the studio environment, and how there's a big gap in terms of the caliber of product you were able to put out as a commentator. One of the things that people have levied towards ESL is that they don't really do that same kind of adaptation. They find something that sticks, and it seems like maybe they just stick with it in that sense. And obviously another point to this is the shoulder content, or those 3-minute little content bits that you were speaking to earlier as well, where ESL really only picked up the slack that they had done. So, just throughout the entire year, there was almost no content. And then very, very late towards the end of the year, after Flashpoint and Blast have been putting out their own skits, suddenly ESL has some other stuff up their sleeve.
Yep.
So, I mean, clearly the commentators and the talent that they have in those tricasts are capable of putting together some sort of content.
Unarguably.
Yeah. Obviously Sponge does the HLTV Confirmed podcast. He hosts that. So he's got, just external content as well. It's not quite the same formula or quite the same medium, but he's been doing content for a long time. I'm sure these guys have ideas because they live and breathe Counter-Strike just like you do, just like we do. So the idea of these commentators or these broadcast talent only suddenly towards the end of the year getting any say or getting any opportunity to express themselves in those between the, during the break content pieces, that must be frustrating from the outside as well, because you yourself must have had to try to bend the ear of the Blast production or something to that effect in order to get your content ideas heard. I wanted to ask a little bit about how that was like when you guys were trying to get your content pieces filmed, because obviously you and Launders did some at the Blast event. So and considering, you go between after Blast and then a Dream Hack, and then after the Dream Hack you go back to Blast, there must have been some in between there where like maybe you got some content ideas, but I don't recall seeing any on the Dream Hack broadcast. You can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there, but did you have any sort of ideas for that sort of thing? What was your input like for the Blast content ideas, and did you see that opportunity there as well at the Dream Hack event that you worked?
Sure. So the content that I would say I'm most involved with at Blast is obviously the skins related stuff. That is a product of when we were in London at the beginning of the year. We had the overtime show, Mohan and I, which is kind of like the blind spot, I think, for Flashpoint. Yes. So it was me and Launders, and then we would have like, the rotating guest. We brought in like Shocks. We had Thorin one time. We had Jason Lake. We would have multiple players at the time because players were on site. And that was awesome. The overtime show was something that Blast kind of handed us and said, like, what can you do with this time? At the end of the day, we were commentating the last best of 3 of the day. So by extension, I think like they kind of leaned towards us to bring in that product. It kind of happened as we arrived in London at the time. We didn't know about the overtime show until we were on site. And then we had 3 weeks there to kind of grow it, right? I'm still incredibly proud of this piece. Me and Mohan put it together. We created the whole thing ourselves. The Frankenstein segment, where we would bring in a player. We spent way too much time one night building this entire like Velcroed whiteboard of the whoever the guests' teammates and opponents that week were, right? And we had him build an ideal player. The Frankenstein. So whose positioning would you take? Whose crosshair placement? Whose, clutch factor, whatever. And it was at that point that I think we kind of started to prove to Blast that like we had ideas because we came up with that. We just said, trust us. We walked into the studio one day with that. They had no clue what was going on and they just let us run with it. And that space there, I think, is kind of what legitimized us as content creators for Blast. They then also at that point were, I believe, either freshly sponsored by CS Money or looking to develop that partnership. And they had me do what was the shot style. It was like a 5-minute segment that we actually used to change the set. That was the whole thing, is that they only let me talk about skins for 5 minutes because we had to like move in a third chair to bring in Jason Lake or whatever what was needed. So it was just filler content. And then they saw me talk about skins and they saw that clearly like skins are something that interest me, something that I can rant and rave about and kind of, hype up a little bit. So I would just review players' inventories, kind of give my thoughts very briefly. By the end of the show in London, I was approached by the content team at Blast. Again, that's the thing with Blast. They have a dedicated content team. A guy named Jordan Livermore is one who came at me and just wanted to pick up my thoughts. He said, look, clearly there's something here and we want to develop this more. So let's talk ideas. Never, by the way, have I been approached by another TO to kind of, attempt these sorts of things, may I add. And in between London and finally getting back to a LAN environment was when we sat down and we discussed different ideas. And that's when we came up with like this package that we used in Copenhagen, which was like the skin survivor, 16 skins down to 1, where we had 4 skins, like the 4 skins of their teammates that they had to choose. I'm blanking on the titles, but like, we threw together all these different ideas and we filmed them on site once we got to Copenhagen. Now we're talking the majority of the 3-minute segments at Blast that were skins related. That's all stemming from them giving me a 5-minute chance on an overtime show. I am not the only person by any means in the CS broadcast talent that can bring ideas to life, or that have valuable ideas and input, creative input to bring to broadcast shows. I would argue that every single person actually is talented enough to bring some kind of content to life if given the chance. I think the problem is that they're not given the chance. Flashpoint did an incredible job with their skits, incorporating all the different members of their talent team in London into different, whether it be like the blind spot after show, which I'm a huge fan of. I love those things. The recorded content over the green screen, hilarious. And they were like sharp too, and people delivered. People who don't know Potter very well might not know, like, she's got some sass. Potter is amazing. She could be an incredible talent, and I think given more and more time, as she has been proving, and has also will continue to prove. Like, you just got to give people the chance to put on a show, and they're going to. Even ESL, by extension, I would say, did. Think of like, I believe these videos were only released on Twitter. Maybe they're on the ESL YouTube. But like, the guys at ESL did the American Psycho skit, like the recreation of like the business cards, but with
So it was a
crosshairs.
crosshair, yeah.
Dude, that was hilarious. And I'm not sure who came up with that idea. I wouldn't be shocked if it was one of the guys in the talent team. I mean, how can anybody deny that a guy like Machine or Sponge is lacking in creativity or personality? Like, that's just obviously untrue. So like, but how can these guys provide you content if you are putting them on an 8-hour broadcast every single day with very little breaks? Like, there's, first and foremost, you have to put somebody into a position to provide you this type of content. I feel like that was given to me by Blast because of forethought, because of efforts before we even arrived at the event. That's where all the prep went in. I shot ideas. Those ideas came to life thanks to a dedicated content team. I don't know if ESL has a dedicated content team, but whoever they use to video or film those skits, excellent job. The editing, again, incredible. And then just the acting, right? Like, that's the big takeaway here. And I'm hoping that this is something that kind of continues into 2021, is that we're no longer just seen as commentator, desk host, analyst, because even these guys have proven that they can blur the lines between broadcast roles. Because what we have is a group of people who love Counter-Strike and love doing a good job, and also are competitive by nature. This is a competitive environment. Everybody's trying to be the best caster. Everybody's trying to be the best host. Everybody's trying to bring the best Counter-Strike show, right? In a larger picture, we want the fans and the viewers to have a great experience. And then I would say, in like the self-interest of ourselves, we want to be seen as top tier, all of us. The more ideas that we can get out, the better. It shows our value as not just commentators, but content creators. And some of us, I'd say, have like this natural drive to be content creators. I think you look at Launders' YouTube channel.
Yes.
It's, Coach Lau has taken off. The fact that he dedicated himself to daily videos, and the fact that his daily uploads are of such a high quality, I don't know how he does it. And I know him incredibly well. I personally can't keep up. That's not my kind of creative realm. Like, I need to sit down and talk about a skit and create it ahead of time. And then when push comes to shove and you need me to act on camera, bro, I'll 100% dedicate myself. Like, we did the Office skit at the Blast Studios. That was a lot of fun. We'd been talking to Blast for quite some time about kind of going out and exploring cities when we visit them for events, to do the kind of the stuff we did with like visiting Copenhagen, when we went to Tivoli, we jumped in the ocean, that kind of stuff. That doesn't take much effort to create, but I think it brings in more value than it takes effort to make. Like, it's so worth it if you are Blast to invest in those kinds of content pieces. And it's difficult to do right now, obviously, with COVID and the nature of that situation. But not everything has to be out in the public, and not everything has to be risky. The Crosshair video that the ESL guys made, and they did one as well with like the red pill, blue pill matrix reference.
Yes.
Like, you can do that while still safely isolated from the public. And you can do all those Flashpoint green screen skits isolated from the public, but you have to set aside time. That's the big takeaway here. You need to allocate time, resources, and a little bit of belief in your broadcast talent that they're going to pull through. And given the chance, I would say every single person who filmed content at the end of 2020 proved that they can do it. And hopefully in 2021 can continue to prove that, because I think that's the big difference, right? That's what's going to make broadcasts different from one another in the next year is the shoulder content, the additional content, the character that your personalities can bring to life for your broadcasts, and how much each organizer is willing to put into that is to me the big question. Like, is ESL going to fall in the footsteps even more so? I hope so, because I know they have the people they need to provide excellent content.
One of the things that I keep thinking back to is something that we touched on a little bit earlier as well, but obviously something that you just mentioned was if you have this TriCast setup and you have no time between these segments, or you really have these very long, grueling days, there's really almost no opportunity, effectively zero opportunity, to get people together, get their ideas like really developed, and spend enough time. Like you were saying, you got to think about it, you got to write it down, you got to plan it out, you got to figure out what exactly the method is here. And that if there's no downtime between them, then it's very difficult to actually film those skits. And by the same extension, like another thing that you brought up earlier in the interview was the fact that some of those early shows, especially in the lockdown era, where just a celebration of the fact that we could still do this, that we could still put on these shows and have these broadcasts and celebrate Counter-Strike. The fact that we had that opportunity was a blessing in and of itself, and we were trying to celebrate that. On the flip side, people could contribute it or conceptualize it as a bit of a even more like raising the stakes on the broadcast talent, raising the pressure on the broadcast talent, because now you've got a bunch of people who might be tuning in for the first time because of the lockdowns. Yep. Oh wait, competitive gaming? Oh wait, this is the easiest, like one of the most simple and on its face games to look at. This is the one of the games that's the most like intuitive to really understand at a high competitive level. Let me tune into this and see how this is. And suddenly you've got like a whole different pressure if you start to think about that, and if you start to think about all of the fans who maybe they've been watching for a long time, but now this lockdown's hit them in a different way, and they just need something to sort of escape into. And so you kind of have to like imagine, oh, I got to put on a good show for these guys as well, not just the newcomers or not just the fans who are going to be there regardless, but also the ones who are like going through some shit because of this situation that we're all in. Did that affect you guys on the broadcast? Did you guys have that enter into your mind while you're also just trying to, adapt to the new circumstances? Or even later on in the year, like, it's continued to sort of spiral out. People thought maybe this would only be going on for a couple months or something, but as it became clear, it's still going into 2021. So I was just curious as to whether or not the pressure had felt different, sort of this mysterious force around actually commentating over a game in Counter-Strike. Did you guys feel that at all, or was it sort of business as usual once you got into it? Were you even able to think about it? What's your take on that?
I think I was aware of it a little bit. Like we obviously with the player base of Counter-Strike going up, with viewership kind of everywhere going up. Yeah, I think you definitely think about the fact that there are newcomers to the viewer count. I don't think I let it like affect our casting so much, or that I like specifically put any effort into including these newcomers. I thought that like what we had prior to the lockdowns was enough to create fans no matter what, right? Like if we had a new viewer at the end of 2019, the quality of the broadcast, the quality of the Counter-Strike, it was enough to convince them to start becoming a fan. It was up to them lending us their attention and their eyes. So then when lockdown came around and all of a sudden you get all these new viewers, I'm just thinking to myself, like, more of the same. If we can just bring more of the same, people will fall in love with this. And I think they did. I feel like I got an influx of messages from new fans during that time that was kind of like, hey, dude, I don't know what CS is. I'm just learning this, but wow, this is something special. And I think a lot of people from like traditional sports as well, since they kind of, maybe played video games, watched real sports, couldn't watch real sports, so now watched video games. Like people who appreciate competitive nature and just competition to that level, I think really grasped onto Counter-Strike pretty quickly. So I was aware of it. I don't think it let it again like inherently change much on the cast. It didn't feel like a pressure as much as it felt like an opportunity to just shape something and to convince a new group of people that CS esports is top tier. So yeah, I think about that. And now as things kind of keep going on, I think nowadays, for example, with Blast having recently partnered with the BBC, trying to kind of get into more traditional media platforms, it is something we have to take into consideration. It does affect our cast. Like at this Blast season, like the start of it, the series, I always forget the titles. The Blast series, we were constantly mentioning Betway at the start of the game. They are our betting sponsor. So before the game goes live, we get the Betway odds. You touch on them. Oh, damn, look how skewed they are. Or, it's not a huge shout out, but you very briefly touch it. Little love, little attention, and you keep going. Once we partnered with BBC, we were no longer allowed to even mention it. No sponsor callouts. we got a completely different program feed actually at the casting desk where they removed all of the elements. Like, we would have like the shop.blast.tv kind of pop in to go buy your merch or whatever. And I remember when once we hit with BBC, I mentioned that once. I made some like, off the hand joke about it. And, I got a little message mid broadcast like, hey, remember, none of that. And so then they actually just removed it from our feed so that we couldn't accidentally mention things, because I think it is natural to just mention what you see on screen. Like I'm trying to connect with the viewer. I'm trying to talk about what you see.
Yes.
And so I would say that's actually kind of what's changed things more is getting officially partnered with platforms that will have new demographics of viewers. That's what's now kind of made me a little bit more aware of what I say. And what I can and cannot say by extension of my employer's partners, so I'm becoming more aware of it, but I don't think the lockdown was necessarily that, because again, we were just trying to bring the product to more and more people in a time where it seemed more and more impossible. So that's a recent development.
Well, speaking of things that you may or may not be able to divulge information on, I did want to touch on pretty much the only headline worthy sort of drama controversy that happened that we'll be discussing in this interview anyway. And that's the strike action that was organized by the CSPPA in the middle of one of the events that you were casting, the Blast Premier Fall Series. So I was curious. I mean, there's been a ton of information that's come out since the initial report, and now it's been a couple of days since you've been back in, back at home from the event itself. So having had time to think about that and maybe take in some of the podcasts and the other content that's come out that have actually discussed this, I was curious as to, just in general, your take on it. Maybe you could talk about how it affected you in the moment, like on the broadcast, but also I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on like where we go from here, what's going to happen in the future. And, to refresh everybody's memory, specifically the strike action was organized seemingly it was supposed to be because of the Blast sharing team comms, but like I said earlier, there's been a ton of information that's come out since then. So yeah, I was just curious as to your take on this whole event and what you think is the sort of the prescribed knowledge or prescribed wisdom going forward with this particular topic that they were striking about, and also with the CSPPA in general, where you think they'll be heading.
Sure. So I think this one's it's a little touchy because it's still raw, and I think it's still ongoing. HLTV just did an interview with Nicholas Estrup, the I want to say head of product and experience or something like that.
He's got some fancy title, yeah.
Yeah, man, some fancy title,
right?
multiple names. But yeah, Nicholas, he's our boss. He's a very real guy. He's very down to earth, and he's an old school esports fan. So Nicholas is very real, and I think that again, it's got to be an ongoing topic with Blast, because we don't know what has changed between Blast and the players and the teams and all these agreements, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on the subject. I'm just going to share my opinion from my perspective as the guy who was about to commentate the game before 2 minutes before live time. We watched an entire production team of 50 people just get completely iced out by an action that I don't think served anybody other than the CSPPA itself. I don't see any angle where in that moment, by protesting in that fashion, 2 minutes before a game is meant to go live, I don't see how that benefits the players at the time. I don't see how that benefits, obviously, Blast. I'll get to that in a second. But I just see it as a publicity stunt. That felt like an absolute publicity stunt, because all of a sudden everybody was talking about it. We're in a time where Counter-Strike's is just, it's ongoing constantly online. We're already in a place where viewers are kind of fatigued with the repetitive nature of these events, the repetitiveness of the matchups and whatnot. And here we are at the final stint of Blast's season, after having, may I add, an entire week off in between Showdown and Blast finals, where not a single thing was made public. And then 2 minutes before the broadcast goes live, this pops up. Come on. Like, I don't understand how that, like, first question, why did that have to be right then and there? Why couldn't, at the end of the Showdown, the exact same statement, the exact same letter, the exact same kind of, front of both players and the CSPPA come forward with their little protest and tell Blast, like, if this doesn't get resolved by next week, then we will refuse to go live at the time. Because I guarantee you would have gotten the exact same result that you did on that day, which was Blast having their hands tied, having to say, okay, we'll start dialogue. There was never going to be a further solution or more change created in that day. The way they did it, all they wanted to hear was, okay, we'll come to the table. That's hostage taking. And the only reason you knew you were going to get that out of them guaranteed in the heat of the moment was because we have a broadcast to deliver. And we don't even have 30 minutes to negotiate in between. We have to go now because Blast, again, partnered with the BBC. Imagine this. Imagine creating a deal between Blast and BBC, pulling something like that off, trying to professionalize a CSGO broadcast to the point that it could be put on their platform. And then 5 minutes before the biggest event of this spree of events, and it gets delayed for over an hour because the players are refusing to play. What? Like, did they not realize how damaging that could have been for Blast? No, that's it. They realize how damaging it could have been for Blast. And I think that's why they tried to pull it. And then I'm trying to sympathize as well for the players. I think Chris J is the victim of that situation because I think Chris J was convinced he was doing the right thing. And may I add as well before I continue on with this, man, like I am all for players being protected. And I'm all for players' rights being respected. But the players in that situation did not benefit. You telling me Chris J in the heat of that moment went on Twitter, shot off all of his takes, got heated up and got distracted away from what he was supposed to be allowed to focus on, which was just playing Counter-Strike, competing at the end of the year for Mouse Sports, who were already showing some good, results and whatnot. You think they needed to be distracted by being the forefront of this protest? I don't think so. But I think that the CSPPA benefited from the heat of the moment. And I was sat next to Launders, man, when Launders took a stance. That was a pretty heated 24 hours because, I saw Mo go to battle for Blast at that time. And I think he did an incredible job at it. And I think that the public was still kind of, torn as to who they wanted to side with. Because again, the public wants what's best for the players. We all want what's best for the players because without the players, we don't have anything. But obviously 24 hours, we realize what's really going on here. We realize that the CSPPA is this self-interested and self-serving entity. And while they claim to be all about players' rights and protecting players and whatnot, and I do think that they've probably done good more towards the beginning of their existence, it just seems like we're a little far away from what they were meant to be. Because by protesting the way they did, I think they inherently went against the players' interests. And I'm not going to say it's the reason Mouse Sports lost, let's be real. But I definitely don't think it helped any of the players in the server focus on what they should be allowed to just focus entirely on. So, yeah, man, I thought that was bullshit. It was damaging. Again, it could have been so damaging for Blast. I had to watch an entire production team of people who, and I hate like the counter arguments against this where it's like, some people have to work manual labor for 12 hours. Yeah, they do. Some people have to work harder than they have to. And that day specifically, I'm already looking at a broadcast team, production team that has to work 3 best of 3s in a day, which I disagree with. I don't think Blast should ever have 3 best of 3s in a day. I'm still firm on that stance, but that was their decision to have 2 BO3 days at the start of the fall finals. And now on top of that triple BO3, you've got to have to delay the start of your show by a couple of hours. Dude, I would genuinely say that for 48 hours, the morale of production took a tank. And nobody sees that. That's the big problem to me, right? Because the CSPPA got what it wanted. Blast came to the table in some way. We still don't know what's going to result of that. But in one way or another, they got Blast to agree to talk. And who that falls on are the people who don't even have platforms like us on broadcast, but it's the replay guys. It's the tournament admins. It's our director and producer who are already there for 10 hours, every single day, that now have to work an extra 2 hours for absolutely no reason, because what you accomplished in the heat of the moment could have been accomplished by doing the same thing 8 days prior. It was just classless, man. That's my that's my takeaway from it. And then additionally, I think one of the things that got kind of pushed under the rug in a really bullshit way is I remember in the letter that came out from the CSPPA, they referenced that it was in protecting the privacy and the communications of the players and whatnot, right? Like, if those files weren't being stored in a proper fashion, in a way that respects the privacy of players, whatever, then okay, these are things that should change. I'm 100% behind that. Let's agree, right? Like that their conversations should be private. But I remember in that letter it's saying that members of the broadcast team were responsible with sharing certain information. Now, I don't know if that was referring to the strategies of the teams, on broadcast, which I may say I think added incredible value to Blast's broadcasts. I think that Thorin has agreed to this. Yanko has agreed that as well, that being able to hear teams' communication and respecting it to the point where you're not airing out their dirty laundry, but you're rather bringing, when you can give props to a certain player because he called a certain thing in the heat of the moment, or an in-game leader. Like we had that clip of Alexi B orchestrating a B-site retake on Mirage. Dude, tell me that shit's not worth it. Like that, oh my God, we know the inner workings of the team that then allows analysts to discuss it in a far more in-depth fashion. It's so worth it. And in that statement that said that, broadcast talent were responsible for sharing details of somebody's life, show me who. How can you make that claim without evidence? Because if there was a member of broadcast who was out talking shit about a player because of something he heard, or discussing the shortcomings of somebody because of maybe what he said to one of his teammates, find me any evidence that a member of broadcast was bad-mouthing or negatively representing a player thanks to information they gained through team comms. And I'll retract what I'm saying right now, which was that just seems like bullshit. That was so unfounded and without any evidence. And obviously because of like the drama of the situation and then some of the people who got involved, and then, the beef between Thorin and Sir Scoots that comes of all of this. And, it's like the Twitter drama gets all the eyeballs at the end of the day. It's not the actual written statement from CSPPA that I think as many people would have read through. But that was something that really rubbed me the wrong way, because it's like, how dare you accuse me or one of my colleagues with doing something that absolutely deserves criticism and shame without any proof that anybody ever did it? Like, that just seems like a jab. And it's a great way to convince the public in the heat of the moment that you're doing the right thing. Oh, they did something bad. Trust us. We need to change this now. Dude, it could have been handled so differently, I think. And my big takeaway from that whole situation is it just felt scummy. It just really proved how big they think they are and how they can throw their weight around and try to bully TOs into coming to the table with an organization that we now know is self-interested, and doesn't represent the best of the players' interests when it doesn't serve them. It's like maybe they are trying to better the position of the players in terms of like a collective, but it's sure as hell inconsistent from my point of view. And I think that like when you're that inconsistent, you've got to be way more careful with the extreme stances that you take. And that is the most extreme position we have ever seen the CSPPA take, was with Blast 5 minutes before broadcast. And what did it achieve? For all of what it risked and for all of what it sullied, what did that actually achieve? And was it worth it? I don't think for any player that it truly was.
Do you think that this is something we might see more of in 2021 or as the years go on? Or do you think that as a result of the sort of dramatic explosion that happened on Twitter, that happened with the players' social medias, and obviously all of the things that come out afterwards, like the fact that
Sure.
Blast's partnership was kind of risked in that respect, and that a lot of people were caught in the crossfire of this, in theory, what is supposed to be between the players association and a tournament organizer, or whoever the affected parties are. Do you think that this is something that the CSPPA might try again, or what's your take in general? Have they sullied too much of their trust with the players or with the TOs?
I hope we don't see more of it. At least not in that fashion. Again, if you wanna stake a protest, if you want to take a stance and refute to start a game, then for God's sake, at least don't do it 5 minutes before it goes live. That should be a lesson learned for the CSPPA right then and there, because that to me was like the biggest overreach of the situation. I also think that players will be more hesitant now to back up those moments, right? Like, think about, do you think that without Chris J, I'm going to use him as an example because he was obviously the most vocal in the heat of the moment, and he was one of the 10 players in the server at the time. I believe it was a Mouse Sports Vitality game. I can't even remember, because the other side of that, I know it was Mouse Sports because of Chris. I can't even remember who the other 5 players were because none of them said shit. It's like it had to come through at least one player's mouth, and it feels like, unfortunately for Chris J, he fell into that role of the victim. Now, I think he was used by the CSPPA. I think he thought he was doing the right thing, and I think he was convinced of that by the CSPPA. I think they're going to have a harder time convincing other players to take that kind of a stance, like that abruptly. I could see them trying to collectively make more changes, and depending on the subject matter, depending on the reasoning, hey man, I'm all for it. Again, I have nothing against the players collectively bettering themselves and their positions. But I do also think that inherently with that situation, that there's no way Blast is recording your team comms without an agreement from Blast and the teams. So if the players have a problem with Blast, but the teams have signed off on something, well, then that problem doesn't exist between the players and Blast, but rather the players and their teams. Like, are you aware entirely of what you've signed off with to your teams and what they can then give tournament organizers? Because there's multiple entities and multiple contracts that are all ongoing, and now that we're trying to throw CSPPA on top of it as if they're above TOs and above teams, I don't think so. I really don't. What authority do they have over Blast when Blast has the agreement from the teams who have the players contracted to them? What authority do they have? What authority should they have? It's again, and this is where my shortcomings, I think, start to come out, where it's like, I don't pretend to have the solutions, but I also, I realize where my biased opinions come from. I understand where my interests lie. I want what's best for Blast because Blast is my employer. I want what's best for the Counter-Strike viewer and the Counter-Strike player because those are the two most important demographics in terms of even having an esport to begin with. So will it happen more? I think it might, because I think that they prove to themselves that they can strong arm people into conversations. But I think it's also going to depend on what comes of Blast and the CSPPA as a result of what has just happened here in Copenhagen. Because again, like Nicholas Estrup said to HLTV, it's an ongoing process. We still don't know if that actually benefited anybody in any way other than putting eyes on the CSPPA. And then thankfully, thank God we have guys like Richard and Thorin who still give a shit enough about Counter-Strike to go to bat for what's right. So I think a lot of my opinion was swayed by Richard Lewis. We went back to the hotel apartments after that broadcast as a group of guys. We all we popped our popcorn, we sat up shop, and we listened to him kind of rant and rave about it, just because we needed to learn as well. Again, it put a microscope on them and their activities, the CSPPA, that I think otherwise was just kind of going under the radar unless you were more closely involved. And I think that's why, Thorin with Flashpoint and the disagreements they had there, that all kind of suddenly seemed more important. Learned about that a little. I don't know, man. I don't want to see more controversy. I think we can all agree that Counter-Strike does not need any more controversy right now.
For sure,
It's been a tough year, dude. Just in terms of losing LAN events, in terms of losing crowds, in terms of coaches cheating, in terms of stream sniping going on, ESIC being this entity that's trying to do good, but is also underfunded and kind of undersupported and I would say underused by TOs, maybe Blast included. Again, I don't know the details there, but I do feel like we need somebody to try and keep everybody honest. Because what we learned in 2020 is that some people are going to do everything they can to get the win, and they're going to take the advantages they can find, and we've got to minimize that, because if we just keep trampling on this game, it's not going to exist forever. That is sadly the reality, right? Is like this whole stream sniping situation where there's too many people to be punished, that nobody's going to be punished at all. Like, what does that say? That we're at that point, and like, okay, now there's this like zero tolerance policy where like if it happens again, you'll be really hit hard. But it was that big of a problem. I don't know. We're in a very sketchy. I feel like the ice is cracking. We can hear it cracking, and we don't know how thin the ice actually is. But nobody's feeling as safe all of a sudden, and we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep crossing this lake, bro. But we're starting to watch a couple people fall in. The majority of everybody's still good, but it's a really weird time, I feel like. And again, one last time, just please, no more controversies. Like, let's find the middle ground.
One of the things that I wanted to sort of segue us into a bit of a lighter topic, and I wanted to ask you a couple of things about your casting in particular that I know will be of interest to people who are checking out this interview. So I was curious personally as to essentially when you were on the come up, and you spoke about this a little bit before we got started about how when the casting duo pairs were not as set, one of the things that you said was like you kind of had the freedom or maybe the requirement, depending on who was available, to just sort of go with the flow and cast with whoever. Obviously, there's a couple of interviews with you and launders floating around, and one of the things that I heard you say something about was that when you have obviously in this interview, you talked about when you have your co-caster with you in person, it's much easier than when it's remote. But one of the things that I think you said with a double tap interview was something to the effect of, learning about your caster, learning about your partner in that sense gives you a better sort of understanding of when they're going to, finish their sentence or when they're just like coming down to continue a thought, and all of those like little subtle micro things that are really important for putting on a very polished product for whatever broadcast you happen to be working for. So I was curious if you could give us some interesting insight here on essentially what sets launders apart from some of the previous co-casters that you've had, and also if there are any things that you particularly had to change about the way that you casted based on who you were casting with, if that makes any sense. Like anything about the way that you had been casting up until that point that had to change because this other person's doing, some of that themselves, and I don't want to double up on that, or maybe this thing will work better than that thing. Anything like that are a little bit on the more micro level, but stuff that you had to consider when you were changing commentary partners, and that stuff that you've learned over the years casting with just launders.
Sure. So I think that we take that from the start, right? When you're coming up in Counter-Strike broadcasts, your goal is to just do a good cast regardless of who you're working with or what event you're doing or what caliber of the game, right? Like the reality of a lot of guys trying to grind their way into this scene is that you do not know who you're going to be working with half of the time. And if you do have a preference for who you work with, you are not always going to get that partner. So you yourself just need to be, I'd say, all around a good caster. Focus on just bringing up your skill floor and refining your skill ceiling. If there's something you do particularly well, hope that you can fit that into a broadcast, but don't force it into a broadcast to the point that it lessens your partner. Because even if you were really good, I would say that there have been times where this was when I was breaking into the LAN events like DreamHack Opens. I started off my first DreamHack Open, I worked with Pansy. I know Pansy's the better caster. She made that event so easy for me, and I can feel that because when you're working with somebody who is a very experienced commentator, they've been through these ropes before, and I'd say Pansy is a great example of somebody who she's worked multiple games, multiple different people, and her casting never falls off because she has the skill set to be adaptive to whatever broadcast she happens to be on. That's not a skill set everybody has. So that in and of itself is one thing, right? Like just focus on bringing the best product. If you are the better caster in a duo, let's say I'm working Mountain Dew League. This was going on when I was kind of breaking into the LAN scene and I was doing LAN events with launders. I would come home and I would still do Mountain Dew League and like little online cups to make that little extra buck. I had the time off. I still wanted to go through the reps of casting. It gave me a chance to then like do something I wouldn't otherwise. I would let the other guy kind of do his thing, gauge his abilities, see where his weaknesses were, and then try to like fill that hole. Again, try to raise the skill floor in that duo. Because if you're the better caster and you just prove it to the guy while you're casting with him, people at home are going to both see that like it's a mismatch in terms of the duo, and therefore like the TO might get flack because they've hired a stronger caster and a weaker caster. You're also going to make that weaker caster look weaker because it by nature of being maybe the better commentator, you can kind of take up too much space. And I think I remember I worked with Sadikist at DreamHack Montreal once. It was a DreamHack Open, like an event that he was way bigger than, but he came to because it was in Canada, and I got to work with him, which was awesome. But obviously that was I'd say like one of the only times where I was working with somebody who I knew straight up was the better play-by-play caster, and was just the more experienced commentator. And I realized, and he taught me in that weekend, that like I was going to have to forego some of my play-by-play space just because how could anybody disagree that he couldn't do it better? And so for the sake of the broadcast, you have to do what's best. He obviously made me as comfortable as possible. He gave me a lot of like the low energy play-by-play throughout the round, the first 2 opening kills, whatever. He would still let me do what I specialized in because the two of us working together, I mean, there's no analyst in that pair, let's be real. But then when we got into the grand finals and it was those big hype moments, dude, of course I just gave it over to him and let him go off because we were delivering the grand finals. You got to put your ego aside. That to me is like advice number 1 for commentators, man. You could have a lot of promise. You could be on your way up in terms of events and whatnot, but you got to put your ego aside when the camera goes live. You want to finish the cast and then be egotistical? Okay, cool, man. Like you got to be confident. I think that's a huge thing with this job. You got to be confident in yourself. So if you're feeling good, feel good about it. But make sure that the person you're working with also feels just as good about the product and the result. Because if not, dude, that jankiness between like between mismatched duos becomes very obvious. So if we kind of talk about my trajectory, right, and like who I worked with then from that point, like as you're coming up into these events, as I said, you're not going to always get to choose who you're working with. And there was a period of time where we kind of had this like this constantly rotating door of duos going on in like the tier 2 scene. I would say it was like me, Harry, Hugo, Tom Biz, Risk, Blue, Launders, like those guys were in there. It was like the DreamHack Open casters at the time. And I would go work at Copenhagen Games with Tom Biz. Then he would go to Ukraine for a Betsnet and work with NATO Safix, and I would partner up with Hugo. And then Harry and Hugo would go off and do an ESL event together because ESL was hiring them as a duo, but but that duo wasn't necessarily so established that every other, one-off event, the Copenhagen Games, etc., would pick them up, right? So it's like we got to know each other as a group, and we got to develop together. Prior to me casting full on with Launders, which I think has now been like, I genuinely want to say, man, that me and Launders are probably the longest standing uninterrupted duo in CSGO commentary at the moment. Obviously the return of Anders and Semler is nobody's going to beat that, but they had a huge period of time off. Both worked with other people, both worked in different games. Me and Mo have been at this probably just as long as Harry and Hugo have, because when I stopped working with Hugo regularly is when he obviously went off with Harry, and they solidified that. They locked that in the same way me and Mohan locked ours in. So it changes your cast, right? Because I think we realized very early on when we were doing that rotating partnership that like working with the same person regularly just creates the better product. You know the intricacies of their speech patterns, you know their humor, you know what they've been doing. I think that's a big one, man. People forget that like you got a tech pause and the game is only 2 rounds deep. Are we going to sit here and pretend to analyze 2 rounds, or are we just going to shoot the shit for a few minutes until the game goes back live? And
Right.
if I know what you've been up to, if I know what your habits and your hobbies are, then we've got something to kind of back and forth with. And if we're traveling the world together at the same time and going to all the same places, then we inherently have stories and we have experiences that we can share with the broadcast, and we can kind of bring them into that friendship. Whereas if I don't know you, I'm not going to ask how your family is. I'm not going to ask you what you went off to and did, days before coming to the event. But I would say luckily with the CS broadcast, I feel as though I'm friends with everybody. Closer friends with some than others, by nature of just that's how things are. But the people who I have gotten to work with, man, we're all friends. There's very little bad blood that I'm aware of in the CSGO talent pool. If somebody has a problem with me, I don't really know about it. And I think that's like goal number 1, right? I'd like to add that to anybody coming up to just don't be a dick. Don't make this job harder, because we all have to spend long hours together in the same rooms, sometimes going through the same bullshit. Sometimes it's not a great working environment. Sometimes you're when we went from Blast to DreamHack Masters and back again, I'm very happy that was with the crew it was. Banks, Maniac, Pimp, myself, Launders, Frankie waiting for us at DreamHack Masters. God, that was a godsend. The energy you bring to this environment is more important than the talent you bring. Sometimes you've got to be able to do a good job, but if you do a good job and you're an asshole, no one's going to want to be around you. So, changing casting when I went into Launders was kind of like, that was somebody I knew I could be best friends with. When I met Launders in Montreal for Northern Arena, I want to say Northern Arena 2016, I had watched his, he's the one who taught me how to b-hop. I'd watch his YouTube videos. And then within a day of hanging out with him, I was just like, damn, this guy's cool. Like we've got a lot in common. We're also very different. I think that's something that kind of makes us work. Mohan is more reserved. I have a hard time not speaking my mind, not being energetic, not being out there. I think I'm just like more bubbly of a person. But these are the balances that we have to kind of strike as we go on in time. And working together, when you know that working together, you will be with that same person, dude, I think that's when you really get a chance to take your commentary to the next level. Because that's when you get to focus on things like your inside jokes. You get to focus on the little details of a retake. For an example, if I can.
Sure.
Anybody right now, if you guys want, go check out the final round between Vitality and Astralis at the Blast Fall Finals, Dust 2, 16-14. The retake on that B site. If you hear in the casting, as that retake goes on, you can almost hear us fighting for control of the play-by-play, which is something, may I say, dude, Mohan has improved on immensely. When I was working with Hugo, Harry, Tom Biz, these are guys who in general have a better play-by-play. So you can stop talking at any moment and they're just going to pick it up with the same level of energy, with the same level of pacing, and with the same ability in terms of rhythm and whatnot, right? Like they're not going to drop the ball. Launders is a guy that when we started working together, I would try to throw to him like it was Hugo, and he'd get fumbled in his words. Because if I stuck him with a play-by-play moment, maybe he wasn't matching my energy level. Maybe he wasn't able to be as quick on his tongue. He needs time to develop his thoughts, or he needed more time back then. Now, again, 16-14, Vitality, Astralis. You hear us combative for the play-by-play. He'll say a sentence. I'll come in with flash off the wall. He'll continue another sentence. I'll take over. He'll throw in 2 words. And it's like, you need to know your partner well enough that saying two things, interjecting with 3 words, isn't going to throw them off their game. That if he says like, that's a huge move, I'm not going to stop talking because I think he's going to keep going. Because now we can grind against each other while we're casting. And I think that makes something really special when you get these heat of the moments, these round 30 kinds of retakes, like when you can really push each other in terms of who's talking and what you're saying, dude, that makes for, in my opinion, tier 1 casting. And I think we nailed it at the end of this year.
Well, I can also agree with that for sure. It was a very different look. Like we talked about earlier, the tournament congestion in general meant that a lot of the products felt very similar, like the blur you spoke of. But one of the things that I always appreciate that you guys bring in general is the hype when it's appropriate, right? In those final moments, like you were saying. One of the things that I noticed that you had a couple of tweets on earlier in the year about was that essentially the people who have the hater takes, right, that they'll try to come at you and say like, oh well, I don't like this guy's casting because of X, and then there's the fabled mute casters meme, which is really just, I imagine nobody really does it. I can't imagine that, because then they wouldn't have anything to tweet about, obviously. So
sure.
Surely that's not the case. Now, one of the things that I do fondly remember looking at on your Twitter was the idea that, like, you weren't here just as a placeholder or something to that effect. You said like you're here to be number one. You're here to offer tier 1 casting, and
I'm not here to be background noise.
That's what it was. Yes, you're not here to be background noise. So I wanted to, if you could walk us through a little bit your mindset going into that. Obviously, like we alluded to, like we talked about earlier in this interview, you don't always have time to reflect and really think about the product that you're being able to put out when it's as crazy balls to the wall as it has been in 2020. But you had enough time to reflect and realize that maybe some people weren't taking you as seriously as you thought they ought to, or maybe some people had misconceptions going into listening to some of the casts. Could you talk about a little bit about what you think people had gotten wrong and what you were trying to correct with those tweets?
Sure. So I remember when I tweeted that as well. Like I had some messages from colleagues that were like, "Hey, dude, whatever people are saying to you, like ignore it," because I think that when you read that, it kind of comes off as if I am responding to somebody. I genuinely wasn't, man. I woke up, we had a day off. I think it was like in the middle of like a Valorant sprint. I had taken a nap on the couch of our apartments in Copenhagen. I woke up and I was just feeling fiery, man. I listened back to a clip of mine from the first leg of the stint, and I was just really feeling myself. Like it felt amazing to be back in a studio environment, because casting remotely for the DreamHack Fall RMR event, for the spring season at the beginning of the year, I was sat right here. I was sat in these same 4 walls, my lights, my computer. You can only get so excited when you're sitting in your apartment. You can only be so hyped. Like I think it's a lot of the excitement of Counter-Strike comes from being in the heat of the moment and being in the environment. Like, how could I ever commentate a game here the same way I could from the tip of the Royal Arena stage to a 12,000 person audience? Like you simply cannot unlock that ability without being there. That's something that Moses taught me. The first time I casted in the Royal Arena, man, I was overwhelmed just by the sheer amount of people in that room looking at you. Like, I'd say even right now, like the guys who are getting in the most amount of casting at the end of 2020 here in this like studio environment, whatnot, these are not the guys who have casted to the Katowice crowds, the Cologne crowds. We have very limited experience in terms of large live audiences, but our natural progression as commentators were building us in that direction. I started with nothing but online events. And then I started casting at DreamHack Open live crowds, where you've got maybe 500 people to 1,000 people max. And I mean, like, that's max. Maybe in Yongshiping would be the only one. Sometimes those DreamHack Open crowds are empty, but you're still on a stage, right? So your voice echoes in the room. You get that feeling, and it shapes the way you cast, because you can no longer, just the acoustics, like. You simply cast differently. The stakes of the moment, the trophy lifting moments, those kinds of things. You learn to commentate those on the fly. These are one of those things that, like, this is a job that you can sit here and theorize and practice as much as you want to. And a lot of people do. But you're only truly getting your reps in when it's live. There's things I want to change about my casting constantly. There's things that I know I can improve on that the moment the game goes live, you just accidentally throw back out the window because you go back to what you're used to, right? Like it's so hard adding those adaptations. That tweet specifically, right? When I said like I'm not here to be background noise, I think there's two sides to it. One, we've lost very talented members of the broadcast team in CS this year. Henry G and Moses going on to other things and doing a great job at these new jobs. May I add, like that's awesome. It's growth for them. It's a new project, and sometimes you just need a change of scenery. But I don't think anybody would disagree that it left Counter-Strike's broadcasts in a weaker place. The Anders Moses duo was awesome. Anders and Semler can probably be just as good if given the chance, but unfortunately, because of logistics and COVID, they got screwed over here to prove what they can really provide at the end of this year. So our kind of expectations of them, I think, rest on what we already know they can do. That talent's not going anywhere. James and DDK are no longer working together, or at least haven't for CSGO. So as much as that is casting specific to the way that I want to commentate, it's also, I think, just a larger statement too about like my presence in the CSGO community. I think there's space cleared up. I don't think everybody has to be a big personality to make this job work, because at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's about the Counter-Strike. But if CSGO is going to be kind of limping through 2020, then I think big voices need to prop it up. I think that's something that Launders has kind of instilled in me. Are you just going to sit there and watch your garden die instead of picking the weeds? He said something along those lines once, and it kind of resonates, where it's like, we got to talk about the big subjects. We got to talk about the controversies. We've got to do these interviews, man. We've got to get our thoughts out there. We've just got to talk. We've got to be more forward. We've got to be the face of this product, or else it could slowly die out, or just be diluted to a point that like we're going to be less proud of it. And then additionally to that, commentary wise specifically, I'm a loud guy, man. I'm a loud person, and I'm excited. I'm naturally excitable. I think, it's a fair criticism when some people don't match my energy levels. You might be watching something and you're not as excited about it as I am. That's because I am more excited about it. It is as simple as that. Maybe sometimes to some people that comes across as too jarring. You don't like listening to it, but I can absolutely look myself in the mirror and say that I am not a phony. I wake up and I get excited about Counter-Strike every single time I get a chance to talk over it. And some days, you gotta kind of push yourself to get there, whether you're just naturally tired or whether something's got you distracted. If you're missing home after 2 months, whatever it's going to be, like, you've got to find that groove. But when the game goes live and the cameras are on, I'm 100% dedicated to Counter-Strike. And if I'm feeling loud that day, if I'm excited, I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to cast it that way. And I don't like this idea of Counter-Strike being in the background. There's been a lot of CS this year, and a lot of online CS where maybe the games and the events don't feel that different from one another. And for that reason, I completely sympathize with why some viewers will put their Counter-Strike on a second monitor, go ahead and play their games or do their work from home while Counter-Strike is in the background. And I respect that. But for me, when I am casting, it's not in the background. That in that moment, in the heat of the moment of the game being live, that is my life. And I mean that. It's genuinely what I do, and it's what I think about all the time. And I just want to be better, and I want to be known as the guy who can bring Counter-Strike to you and get you excited about it. Yes, it might be the same teams that you've seen a dozen times in the same environment with the same shitty webcams with no crowd getting all excited about it. But if my voice is what gets you a little bit more excited, because I am obviously that much more excited than the average viewer, dude, I'm all for it. And if it comes with the flack of some people telling me, like I just yell too much, sometimes that's true. Keeping control of your voice and making sure that you're not just like maxing out and just screeching almost, like it's an easy trap to fall into. When you're excited, You get loud. And when your voice is loud, it can sound the same. You don't get those ups and downs in your tones as much. That's something you've got to be aware of. But when you're excited, you stop thinking about those intricacies and you start just rolling with the excitement of the match. It's something that, again, we're constantly trying to work on because we're aware of it. The most important thing with a broadcast, I think, is to sound good. And there are so many techniques that you can use to please the ear of the viewer. And I'm aware of them, guys. Like, we do this for a living. Me and Mohan, we have these conversations. I feel like sometimes, again, this is the thing with haters, bro, is like, they do not put as much thought into commentary as I do. And that is why I will always respect my own opinion. In my, you've got to me, it's like there's the rankings, okay? Firstly, I have to be satisfied with the product I'm providing. Secondly, it's Launders. He needs to be just as happy with what I'm doing. After myself and Launders, the next opinions I respect are my colleagues, because those are the guys that know what Counter-Strike broadcasts are about. They know the lifestyle that we're going through as we're trying to do this job as well as we can. And they also know Counter-Strike better than anybody else, So if my analyst desk tells me like, dude, that was a hype game. Like, wow, what a thriller. Cloud9 versus Complexity at the Blast Showdown, for example, right? We came off of that casting desk, Maniac, Pimp, James Bank, they walked in the room like, holy shit, that was good. And then I turn on my phone and I get some people telling me like, I don't know, you just yelled too much. Bro, your opinion is not as important as the opinion of the people that I work with.
Yes.
But there is also value in the public's criticism. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I am the best and I am flawless. That is not the truth. I would love to be. I will try to be. But if I see like low-level criticisms, dude, those ones are super easy to ignore. There are valid criticisms sometimes. I will be truthful. Like there occasionally you find these gems where somebody has written out like a full-fledged thread of tweets. And I'm like, I'm going to spend the time to read this. I'm going to go look at what he's talking about to see whether I agree or not. And, sometimes I can see where he's coming from, but I also know things he doesn't. I dropped the ball in that moment because production's trying to tell me about a tech pause that's coming up. They don't know when production's talking to us. We're supposed to cover that, They like if Mohan makes a joke to me and it falls flat, it's probably because I was looking at something else. He made a Dr. Disrespect diss at one point during our recent games. And I didn't even hear the last, because he said like 3 words. And I didn't even hear what he said because I was like on my HLTV page looking for a stat to drop in the next line. And it's like, yeah, okay, so a joke kind of fell, but I then rebounded with game-specific information that I think makes up for that, right? If somebody's telling me that I'm ignoring Mohan's jokes, it's like, well, I know what I was doing there. You got to keep an ear to the ground, right? Because there are more viewers than there are colleagues, which means, they're going to have varying opinions and different opinions. But I do like to think that like we know what we're doing. And a lot of the criticisms probably come from people who think that we're convinced our product is perfect, which I don't know anybody who does this job that thinks they're perfect. We are our own biggest critics, and it's hard to listen to yourself back, man. Because any flaw that somebody might hear in my casting, I promise you, I hear it 10 times louder. And we want to fix it as much as we can. But like we've alluded to throughout this interview, man, sometimes there's just no time to fix things day in, day out. I would ask anybody who thinks that I would say that like you go listen to the finals of DreamHack Masters, where we were stretched thin and we had to do everything from analyze to commentate to no breaks in between. You listen to those finals, I'm overdoing it. There was a lot of just yelling. I wasn't focused on the sound of the voice. I was more focused on just trying to be excited. We had a 40-minute tech pause in the deciding map of double overtime. When we come back from that 40-minute break and I try to bring all the hype back to where it was, how is any human being going to get you as excited as you were before that tech pause?
Yes.
It's impossible. And yet it's my job and it's my duty to my boss, my employer of DreamHack, to make that final moment, that trophy lift moment, right, just as exciting, because I know that that's the moment they're going to use in the montages for their upcoming events. So again, not something that somebody's going to realize as an average viewer who's been waiting there for 40 minutes, but something I know I have to do in order to please my employers, because ultimately the people who employ me are the ones that I'm doing this job for, right? Like, it might not be in the viewer's best interest to hear me try and revamp to that level, right? To go from a 0 to 150, but I have to do it. And they don't understand I have to do that all the time. I do get it. You know, again, this is our job, man. It's our craft. It is everything we think about. So
one of the things that you alluded to a lot in general throughout that whole answer was something that resonates with me personally a lot is figuring out who to take the feedback from and how to value it and how to rank it, even like you were describing. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about in general is you obviously also said that there are things that you wanted to fix, you wanted to change about the way that you handle casting. Given that we do have the time now to, in theory, reflect and listen back and all of those wonderful things that you said definitely don't hurt at all to listen back to your flaws. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is where you think you're going to be going in 2021. Where do you want to be? And what things are going to be the same, what things are going to change, what things are going to increase or get bigger or smaller. What's your take on essentially where you guys want to be in the next year as far as the commentating space goes?
So I think a lot of this answer actually hinges on what the casting environment's going to be for the next year.
True.
We don't know if we're going to be remote again. We don't know if we're going back to studios. The COVID situation is obviously constantly evolving and still ongoing. So what I hope that we have is, at minimum, a return to where we were for Blast Fall Finals, the Blast Showdown. I want to be back in a studio. If we have to cast remotely again, our casting will drop off from where it was at the end of 2020. We got a lot of, positive feedback in these last couple of months. People saying like, damn, their casting has improved since the start of the year. And a part of me, just kind of laughs and it's like, well, no shit. Like you don't know, but we were stuck in our basements remotely with seconds of delay in between speaking to one another. It's like when we were taking all of that heat during the spring kind of, season. And there's one moment like we deserve the heat. Okay. We missed the fact that a bomb plant didn't get planted. Somebody lost the round because they could have planted, but they got killed, and we just glanced over it. But again, you have to remember that during this time, we are literally commentating off of a Discord feed. I am not in a GOTV. Let's compare. In studio, I am logged into the GOTV with Prius's observing at my hands. I've got scoreboard accessible, everything I need to know. Plus, I can open HLTV tabs in the Steam overlay. Like, I have a full computer at my disposal, while next to me, I have a program feed and see exactly what the viewer sees. When we're working remotely, we were casting off of a Discord call. I am not in GOTV. I do not have in-game access. We're just working with so fewer tools. And also all the while, this is not an ideal setup casting off this microphone. We stand up to commentate most of the time. At Blast, we have proper headsets. We have mobility. We can move. I can't lean too far or too forward because then suddenly it's changing what you hear at home.
Yes.
Like this is a restrictive environment to do this job from. So yeah, once we were back in a studio, we obviously sounded better. I knew we were going to sound better because we sounded our very best when we did Blast London at the start of 2020. And if we had continued the entire year from there, I think people would realize just what we can actually provide. And that we can be what I believe to be is one of the best duos in CS commentary. That's what I want from 2021 because that's where I feel we're kind of ending the year at, by the decisions of others to move on from CS casting, by the decisions of different organizers to either hire us or not. I think that what we bring to Blast is predominantly our only employer. We almost feel like Blast is kind of uniquely ours in that way. So I also think Blast has some of the most amount of effort in terms of making their show unique and making their show top quality. They've got some of the best production in terms of the replays. Dude, their replay team make our job infinitely easier. Also something we never had while working remote. You know, how do I recall a round 2 rounds ago if I'm not even entirely sure of the details because the Discord call dropped down to 360p and I can't even read the kill feed anymore? You know, like that's the kind of stuff that's going to affect our casting. But in an ideal world where we can go back to where we finished this one, I just want to do more of the same, man. I feel like our casting's in a great spot. I feel like we have already identified what we need to improve on. We know what we do well already, and we know that we can do it consistently. That's the thing. Is it's about consistent casting now. I do not want to do another grind like we did with Blast Showdown to DreamHack Masters to Blast Finals. I think that if you go and listen to the start of the Blast Finals, rewind. Blast Showdown was our most consistent bout of casting. Every single best of 3 was for elimination. We had to do 2 best of 3s in a day. Easy. That is a great formula. You know, we were all over that event. We knew every team because we were casting every game. We went to DreamHack Masters. We did something like more than 25 best of 3s and a best of 5 finals because every single match is BO3 and there's a lower bracket. Dude, it's just too much. That burned so much of us that when we came back for Blast Finals, the first 3-4 days of Blast Finals, dude, we were no longer in our rhythm. You know, when we were set up in Copenhagen, dude, we had our kitchen, we had our little like apartment type hotel room. We had our routines. I was streaming in the morning. I would review our games before we'd leave for the studio. We'd get into the studio. You know, we'd talk about what we wanted to prior, and then we'd go live. We'd go back home. We'd make food. We'd hang out. We'd play some CS, shoot the shit, go to bed. We had a good rhythm. You go listen to the first days of Blast Finals, man, we were burnt. The energy on the cast was so lackluster. I remember sitting there casting, like I think it was a big versus G2 game. And I'm aware of my lack of energy, but I'm almost at the point where, like, sadly, I'm sorry Blast, I'm sorry Launders, I'm sorry the viewers, but like I was just over it. I was like, I don't want to cast right now. I want time to rest. I want to just look at a computer screen. I want to browse YouTube. We just did too much in too short of a period. But then obviously the end of that event sinks in and it's like, well, these are our last 5 best of 3s of all of 2020. And that realization kind of, you know, it kickstarts the machine. And I think we finished the year very strong. Our last cast was awesome. And I think it's because, you know, on that last broadcast day, dude, production brought us a bottle of champagne. We had steaks for dinner, thanks to Blast. God bless. Like we were just in that zone where we were having fun again because it felt like the celebration of all of our effort. And that's the thing with casting, man. It's a product of your headspace. Like if you're having a good time on any given day, you're going to cast better than if you're having a shitty day, you got a bunch of bad news and you have to pretend for the sake of broadcast. So what I want from us for 2021 is just a better working environment. Because the more comfortable and the more satisfied we are off camera, the better we are and the sharper we are when the game goes live. And additionally to that, I hope that this next year is kind of a chance for us to take content to a new level. I think we've proven we're strong commentators. Mohan is an excellent content creator, and I've got some catching up to do, but I've also got ideas. And it just comes down to the chance from the TOs to take those ideas, bring them into existence, and prove their value. You know, I'm trying to stream daily as well, just trying to put myself out there for people who want to get to know me more. I think that, you know, I have kind of been keeping myself under a bit of a rock. When I'm not live with tournaments, I'm normally nowhere to be found. And that's just because I respect my private space. You know, I like my downtime. I like being home and kind of being in my own little cave. And I think we all appreciate that time too. But I do realize I want to open the window in 2021. You know, I want people to come see what I'm about, because the goal, obviously, for the year in general is to just keep pushing the bar for CSGO. If CSGO is going to have some of its biggest personalities kind of move on to different spaces within the same esport, then that creates space. You know, if there's too many heads trying to poke out of the grass, then there's not enough space for everyone to thrive. But I feel like there is space being opened right now, and I am super down to try and take some of that for myself. I've been doing this job for 4 years now. I think I've been doing it at the top tier for the last year, like in terms of events. And so 2021, it's like I'm cautiously optimistic because it could either be the best year yet, or it could be more of the same, which has been kind of unfortunate, right? From 2019 to 2020, we had huge expectations, man. We thought this was the year. COVID struck. We adapted. We survived. We proved we're still worth believing in. But now 2021, we want to get back to where we thought we were going to be. It's another chance to prove to everybody, viewers, players, TOs, that like me and Mo can be the best. So there's a lot of people in Counter-Strike who are incredibly talented and who are going to prove that talent in this next year. And we just want to make sure that we're at the top of that list, man.
Well, you said you wanted to open the window for 2021. I think this interview has been a great start. Really appreciate you spending the time. Since we're towards the end here, I wanted to give you the floor. If you have any shout outs or final words or stuff to leave us with, feel free to take it now.
Sure. I want to say thank you to everybody who's put time and energy into CS in 2020. Blast specifically for taking a lot of chances with us and for giving us a platform to kind of do our best work. I hope that 2021 is a better work environment for everybody on the CSGO broadcast side, for production as well. I think that there are things that we can do to just improve everybody's overall experience. And my props will always be given to the TOs who take that seriously. To the players, make sure your coaches aren't cheating. Make sure we keep up the competitive integrity of CS, because I think that that's been in question for a little too long, and it's a very dangerous road that we're starting to slide down. So to that, there's an extra bit of attention, and then to the viewers too, man. Thank you guys for praising us and for appreciating the effort we put into CS commentary. Keep watching. Most importantly, if you love this game as much as we do, just keep watching. We're trying our damnedest to bring special pieces and to make broadcasts look a little bit more different. And I think 2021 is going to be good for that. Flashpoint is doing an awesome job with the content. Blast is keeping up their content, and I think ESL is following in the same path. So yeah, man, 2020 was a weird year for everybody and CSGO. I think 2021 is going to bring us a little bit back closer to normal, and I'm very excited to be a part of that. And then lastly, man, thanks to you, bro, for the chance to kind of vent and talk CS.
Thank you again for your time.
Cheers, man.